The strange thing about Ethan Carter wasn't that he was a billionaire. It was that nobody could remember the last time he let anyone get close. On a rainy Thursday evening in Manhattan, the ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel glowed beneath crystal chandeliers and warm golden light. The city's most influential people filled the room. CEOs, investors, politicians, the kind of people who measured time in acquisitions and private flights. At the center of it all stood Ethan Carter, 38 years old, founder of one of America's fastest-growing technology companies, worth billions, admired by millions, yet somehow completely alone. A woman in an elegant navy dress smiled as she approached him near the champagne tower. Her confidence was polished, her laugh rehearsed, her intentions obvious. "Ethan, a few of us are heading to the rooftop after this. You should come." Ethan glanced at her, then at his watch, a Swiss masterpiece resting beneath the cuff of his tailored black suit. "I have an early meeting." The woman forced a smile. "It's almost 9 o'clock. Then I should probably get some sleep." She laughed awkwardly before walking away. Defeated. Again. It wasn't the first rejection that night. It wasn't even the third. People stopped counting years ago. Ethan had become famous for many things. Building a billion-dollar empire before 40. Turning failing companies into market leaders. Reading a room faster than most people could read a headline. But among Manhattan's elite, he was known for something else. He rejected everyone. Not rudely. Not dramatically. Simply and consistently. Invitations. Introductions. Blind dates. Family setups. Charity gala encounters. It didn't matter. Nobody got through the wall. "You know," his longtime friend Marcus said as he appeared beside him holding a glass of sparkling water. "At this point, people are starting to think you're secretly married." Ethan smirked. "That would require meeting someone. You meet thousands of people every year." "Exactly." Marcus shook his head. "You're impossible." Ethan's gaze drifted across the ballroom. Everywhere he looked, he saw performance. Perfect smiles. Perfect conversations. Perfect appearances. Everyone selling something. A business. A reputation. An image. Sometimes themselves. "Have you ever considered," Marcus continued, "that maybe not everyone wants something from you?" Ethan looked at him. "That's a nice thought. And I stopped believing nice thoughts a long time ago." Marcus sighed. He had heard versions of that answer before. The truth was nobody really knew when Ethan became this way. Maybe it was success. Maybe it was disappointment. Maybe it was years of wondering whether people admired him or merely admired what came with him. Whatever the reason, the result was always the same. Distance. Safe. Predictable distance. Across the room, another introduction was being arranged by a well-meaning acquaintance. Marcus noticed it immediately. "Incoming," he warned. Ethan followed his gaze. A woman was already making her way toward them. Beautiful. Confident. Carefully prepared. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I'm leaving." Marcus laughed. "You can't leave. Every time someone tries to introduce you to a woman. Watch me." 10 minutes later, Ethan stepped outside into the cool Manhattan rain. The city lights blurred across the wet pavement. Yellow taxis moved through the streets like reflections floating across glass. Behind him, music and laughter continued inside the hotel. Ahead of him, silence. He preferred the silence. As his driver opened the car door, Marcus appeared one final time beneath the awning. "One day," he called out, "someone's going to surprise you." Ethan smiled politely. The same smile he used whenever someone said something they believed was profound. "I doubt it." Then he slid into the back seat and disappeared into the rain. What Ethan Carter didn't know was that less than 16 hours later, in a small neighborhood restaurant nearly 7 miles away, a waitress named Claire Bennett would look directly at him without recognizing his name, without caring about his money, and without realizing she was about to become the first person in years capable of changing the direction of his life. The next morning arrived wrapped in soft gray clouds and the steady rhythm of rain against Manhattan windows. While the city hurried through another workday, Claire Bennett tied the strings of her black apron behind her back and unlocked the front door of Maple Street Café. The small restaurant sat between an old bookstore and a flower shop that always smelled faintly of lavender. It was not famous. It was not trendy. Most people walked past it without noticing. Claire preferred it that way. She switched on the lights one row at a time. Warm yellow reflections spread across polished wood tables. Coffee beans filled the air with a familiar scent that felt more like home than any apartment she had ever rented. The owner, Mrs. Harper, arrived 10 minutes later carrying a box of fresh pastries. "You are early again," she said. Claire smiled. "You say that every morning." "Because every morning it is true." Claire laughed softly and carried the pastries to the display case. At 29, she had mastered the art of moving quietly through life. Not invisible, just unnoticed. There was a difference. Customers remembered her kindness. Children remembered her smile. Elderly regulars remembered that she never forgot their usual orders. But almost nobody asked questions about her. That was fine with Claire. Some stories felt safer when left untold. By 8 o'clock, the breakfast crowd began arriving. Construction workers, teachers, office employees clutching umbrellas and rushing through the rain. Claire greeted each one with the same calm warmth. No performance, no forced enthusiasm, just genuine attention. Around noon, the rush slowed. She finally paused long enough to sip a cup of coffee near the front window. Outside, rain slid down the glass in silver lines. Across the street, people hurried through puddles without looking up. Claire watched them for a moment before reaching into her bag and pulling out a folded envelope. The edges were worn from being opened too many times. Inside was a medical bill. Not new, not surprising, just another reminder. She stared at the number printed at the bottom of the page. Then she folded it carefully and returned it to her bag. No complaint, no self-pity, only a quiet breath before she stood and returned to work. "You know," Mrs. Harper said from behind the register, "most people would be angry." Claire looked up. "About what?" "Life." Claire considered the question. Then she shrugged gently. "Being angry does not make the bills smaller." Mrs. Harper shook her head with a smile. "You are unusual." Maybe she was. Most people did not know that Claire spent nearly every evening helping care for her mother across town. Most people did not know she had once planned a very different future. Dreams had a way of changing shape when responsibility entered the room. She had learned that years ago. The bell above the front door chimed. Claire glanced up automatically. Another customer. That was all she expected. A man stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. Tall, well-dressed, quiet. For a brief moment, she returned her attention to arranging coffee cups. She did not recognize him. She did not notice the expensive watch beneath his sleeve. She did not know his face appeared regularly in financial magazines. To Claire, he was simply another customer escaping the rain. "Good afternoon," she said with an easy smile as she picked up a menu. "Welcome to Maple Street Café." For the first time in many years, Ethan Carter entered a room where nobody cared who he was. For a second, neither of them said anything. Rain tapped softly against the cafe windows. Coffee machines hummed in the background. Somewhere near the back, dishes clinked together. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary moments. Yet something about the exchange felt strangely unfamiliar to Ethan. "Table for one?" Claire asked. "Yes. Anywhere you like." She handed him a menu and returned to the counter before he could say another word. Ethan stood there briefly, waiting. Not for service. For recognition. It never came. Nobody whispered. Nobody stared. Nobody nudged a friend and pointed toward the billionaire standing near the entrance. The realization was oddly unsettling. He chose a table beside the window and sat down. Outside, the rain continued falling across Manhattan in long silver streaks. Inside, life moved on without adjusting itself around him. 5 minutes later, Claire approached with a notepad. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Ethan glanced up from the menu. "Black coffee. Any particular roast?" He blinked. "There is more than one." Claire smiled. "3, actually." The smile was small, natural, not impressed, not nervous, just polite. She explained the options and Ethan selected one almost at random. "And food?" she asked. "What is good?" "Depends." "On what?" "Whether you want an honest answer or the answer I am supposed to give." Ethan looked at her more carefully. "The honest one." Claire pointed at a breakfast sandwich listed halfway down the menu. "That one." "Why?" "Because I ate it this morning." Ethan laughed before he realized he was doing it. A real laugh. Brief. Unexpected. Claire simply wrote down the order. "Good choice." Then she walked away. Ethan watched her disappear behind the counter. Strange. Most conversations in his world felt calculated. Every sentence measured. Every reaction managed. Yet Claire spoke with the effortless confidence of someone who had nothing to gain. 10 minutes later, she returned with his coffee. The ceramic mug landed gently on the table. No dramatic presentation. No exaggerated friendliness. "Careful," she said. It is hot. Thank you. She nodded and moved to another customer. Ethan lifted the mug. The coffee was excellent. Rich. Smooth. Better than the expensive blends served in many executive boardrooms. He found himself looking around the cafe. An elderly couple shared pie near the window. A college student studied from a thick textbook. A father helped his young daughter color on a paper placemat. Nobody seemed in a hurry. Nobody seemed interested in status. The atmosphere felt almost foreign. His phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Emails. Messages. Meeting requests. He silenced it without reading them. 20 minutes later, Claire returned carrying the check. Everything okay? She asked. Actually, yes. Good. She placed the bill on the table. As Ethan reached for it, he noticed a small handwritten sentence at the bottom. Not printed. Not required. Written in blue ink. Hope your coffee was warmer than your mood today. He stared at the words. Then looked up. Claire was already helping another table. There was no audience. No performance. No expectation of a reaction. Ethan looked back down at the receipt. A smile slowly appeared. The kind that had become rare in recent years. Across the room, Mrs. Harper noticed immediately. You made him smile, she whispered as Claire passed the register. Claire glanced toward Ethan. Who? The man by the window. Claire shrugged. Maybe the coffee deserves the credit. But as Ethan folded the receipt and slipped it carefully into his pocket instead of throwing it away, something neither of them realized was already beginning. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about a deal, a company, or a problem that needed solving. He was thinking about a waitress who had treated him exactly like everyone else. The receipt should have been forgotten by the next morning. Ethan knew that. His schedule certainly thought so. By 7 o'clock, he was already seated in a glass conference room 40 floors above Manhattan, surrounded by executives discussing quarterly forecasts and expansion plans. Charts filled massive screens. Numbers moved across presentations. People spoke with urgency. Yet every so often his attention drifted toward a folded piece of paper resting inside his jacket pocket. Hope your coffee was warmer than your mood today. It was ridiculous. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation. He had made decisions affecting thousands of employees. Yet somehow a handwritten sentence from a waitress had occupied more space in his thoughts than half the meetings on his calendar. Ethan, a vice president, looked at him expectantly. Sorry, Ethan said. Continue. The meeting resumed. But the distraction remained. By noon, he found himself standing beside the office window, staring at the rainy streets below. His assistant entered carrying a tablet. Your lunch reservation is confirmed at the Regency Club. Ethan looked outside again. Cancel it. She blinked. Would you like me to move it? No. Then where would you prefer to eat? Ethan paused. Somewhere else. 30 minutes later, he was walking through the door of Maple Street Café for the second day in a row. The bell chimed overhead. Warm air greeted him. Fresh coffee filled the room. For reasons he could not entirely explain, the tension in his shoulders eased almost immediately. Claire was carrying a tray toward another table when she noticed him. Welcome back, she said casually. Not surprised. Not excited. Just friendly. Ethan found himself oddly pleased that she remembered him. Good afternoon. Same table, she asked. He glanced toward the window seat. Sure. Good choice. The rain looks more dramatic from there. Ethan smiled. I will keep that in mind. Claire handed him a menu, even though both of them knew he probably would not need it. As she walked away, Ethan noticed something unusual. She treated every customer exactly the same. The retired couple near the entrance received the same attention he did. So did the delivery driver grabbing a quick lunch. So did the college student studying alone with headphones. No favoritism. No calculations. No adjustments based on status. The realization stayed with him. 20 minutes later, while he finished his meal, an elderly man entered the cafe carrying a worn umbrella. Claire immediately crossed the room. Mr. Donnelly, she said warmly. Your usual? The man smiled. Only if you promise not to tell my doctor. Claire laughed softly and disappeared toward the kitchen. A few moments later, she returned with a bowl of soup before he even sat down. On the house? The man asked. Only because I know you will complain if I charge you. The old man chuckled. Ethan watched the exchange in silence. There was something genuine about it. Something impossible to fake. No audience. No reward. Just kindness offered without expectation. As Claire passed his table again, Ethan spoke before he could stop himself. You seem to know everyone. She glanced around the cafe. Not everyone. Most of them. That is what happens when people keep coming back. And why do they keep coming back? Claire thought for a second. Then she smiled. Maybe the coffee. Ethan looked at her. I do not think it is the coffee. For the briefest moment, Claire laughed. A real laugh. Quiet. Unforced. Then she shook her head and returned to work. And for the second day in a row, Ethan Carter found himself looking forward to staying a little longer. 3 days became 5. 5 became 8. By the second week, Ethan had stopped pretending his visits were accidental. Maple Street Cafe had quietly become part of his routine. Not because of the food, not because of the coffee, and certainly not because it was convenient. The cafe sat nearly 20 minutes away from his office in midday traffic. His assistant noticed the pattern first. You have passed 12 restaurants closer to headquarters, she pointed out one afternoon. Ethan signed a document without looking up. I like their coffee. She nodded politely. Neither of them believed that answer. Across town, Claire remained completely unaware of the effect she was having on one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. To her, Ethan was simply a customer who preferred the window table and always left the exact tip amount. Nothing more. Nothing less. On a cool Wednesday evening, Ethan arrived later than usual. The lunch crowd was gone. The dinner rush had not yet started. The cafe felt quieter than normal. Claire was wiping down a table near the back when he walked in. Long day, she asked. Ethan looked surprised. Why would you think that? She pointed toward his tie. It was slightly crooked. You usually fix that before coming inside. Ethan instinctively adjusted it. Claire smiled and returned to work. The observation should not have mattered. Yet somehow it did. Most people noticed his company, his reputation, his net worth. Claire noticed a crooked tie. He sat near the window as usual. Rain clouds were gathering again beyond the glass. A few minutes later, Mrs. Harper approached his table carrying a slice of pie. Compliments of the house, she said. Ethan looked up. I did not order this. I know. Then why am I getting it? Mrs. Harper glanced toward Claire, who was helping another customer. Because someone noticed you skipped lunch yesterday. Ethan frowned slightly. How would anyone know that? You came in at 4 o'clock and ordered breakfast. She smiled. Not exactly detective work. Before Ethan could respond, she walked away. His eyes drifted toward Claire. She never looked over. Never checked whether he had noticed. Never waited for appreciation. She had simply paid attention. The realization stayed with him throughout the meal. Later that evening, as he prepared to leave, he noticed Claire gathering her things behind the counter. Her shift was ending. She exchanged a few words with Mrs. Harper, picked up a worn canvas bag, and stepped outside. Normally, Ethan would have headed directly to his car. Instead, he lingered near the entrance. Through the window, he watched Claire cross the street and disappear toward a city bus stop. No rideshare. No private car. Just a crowded bus pulling away into evening traffic. Something about the image felt important. The next day, curiosity led him somewhere unexpected. During a conversation with Mrs. Harper, he casually mentioned Claire. She works hard, he said. Mrs. Harper smiled knowingly. That she does. Has she been here long? Almost 4 years. Ethan nodded. She seems busy. Mrs. Harper became quiet for a moment. Most people would be tired working one job. Claire works too. Ethan looked up. Too. The cafe during the day. Caregiving at night. She immediately returned to organizing receipts as if she had not revealed anything significant. But Ethan sat very still. For the first time, he realized how little he actually knew about Claire Bennett. And for the first time, he wanted to know more. The information stayed with Ethan longer than he expected. 2 jobs. Day after day. Week after week. Not for ambition. Not for status. Simply because someone depended on her. The thought followed him through meetings, board presentations, and investor calls. It was not sympathy. Claire would probably hate that. It was respect. Quiet respect. A few days later, Ethan sat alone in his office overlooking the city. The late afternoon sun reflected across the glass towers of Manhattan. His assistant stepped inside carrying a folder. The community grant applications need final approval. Ethan nodded distractedly. Then an idea formed. Simple. Harmless. At least that was how he justified it. There is a small cafe on Maple Street, he said. I want to support local businesses in the area. His assistant looked surprised. That is unusual. Consider it community outreach. She made a note. What would you like me to arrange? Ethan leaned back. Offer one of their employees a management position at a larger restaurant group we own. Better salary. Better benefits. Significantly better. Any specific employee? Ethan hesitated for half a second. Claire Bennett. 2 days later, Claire stood near the counter listening politely as a representative from the restaurant group explained the opportunity. The salary was nearly double what she currently earned. Flexible hours. Full benefits. Career advancement. By every practical measure, it was an incredible offer. Mrs. Harper listened from across the room, saying nothing. Claire thanked the woman for her time, asked thoughtful questions, read every page carefully. Then she smiled and closed the folder. I appreciate this, she said, but I cannot accept. The representative blinked. May I ask why? Claire glanced around the cafe. Because this place needs me. You could help your family more with the additional income. Maybe. Claire nodded. But money is not the only thing people need. The representative left 30 minutes later. The answer remained unchanged. No negotiation. No hesitation. No attempt to increase the offer. Just a simple no. That evening Ethan received the update. He stared at his assistant for several seconds. She turned it down? Immediately. Did she ask for a higher salary? No additional benefits? No. Ethan looked toward the city skyline outside his office window. For years, he had watched talented people change jobs for less money than he had offered. Some switched companies for slightly larger offices. Others for better parking spaces. Yet Claire had declined an opportunity that could have changed her financial situation overnight. The next afternoon, he visited the cafe as usual. Claire greeted him with the same calm smile she always wore. No mention of the offer. No indication that anything unusual had happened. Finally, as she refilled his coffee, Ethan asked, Can I ask you something? Depends. On what? Whether it is one of those dangerous questions people regret asking. Ethan laughed softly. Fair enough. Why do you stay here? Claire looked around the cafe. The wooden tables. The familiar faces. The quiet warmth. Then she looked back at him. Because some things are worth more than convenience. Ethan studied her expression. Even if it costs you? Claire considered the question. Everything valuable costs something. She started to walk away, then paused. The problem is that people spend so much time asking what something is worth. Her eyes softened slightly. They forget to ask why it matters. Then she returned to work, leaving Ethan alone with a realization that made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. For years he had measured almost everything in numbers. Profit, growth, value, return. Yet the woman standing behind the counter had just reminded him that not everything important could be calculated. The conversation should have ended there. Yet Claire's words followed Ethan everywhere. They echoed through conference rooms filled with executives. They lingered during private dinners he barely tasted. They surfaced late at night when Manhattan glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. The problem was not that she had challenged him. People challenged him all the time. The problem was that she had been right. One Friday evening, nearly 3 weeks after their first meeting, Ethan arrived at Maple Street Cafe later than usual. The dinner crowd was beginning to thin. A soft jazz song drifted through the speakers overhead. Claire was helping an elderly customer gather several grocery bags near the entrance. She carried them outside without being asked. When she returned a few minutes later, Ethan noticed something different. She looked tired. Not unhappy, just tired. The kind of tiredness that settles quietly behind a person's eyes after carrying responsibilities for too long. As she approached his table, he found himself asking a question he normally would not ask. When was your last day off? Claire paused. I am trying to remember. That is not encouraging. A faint smile appeared. It has been a while. You work every day? Most days. Why? Claire set down his coffee cup before answering. Because life keeps sending invoices. Ethan laughed despite himself. That sounds expensive. It is. She glanced toward the window where evening rain had started falling again. But there are worse problems. Before he could ask another question, the bell above the door chimed. A middle-aged woman entered carrying a folder. She spotted Claire immediately and waved. Claire excused herself and crossed the room. Ethan tried not to listen. He failed. The physical therapy sessions helped, the woman said quietly. Your mother is improving. Relief softened Claire's face. Genuine relief. That is wonderful. The therapist was impressed. She has always been stubborn. Both women laughed. After a few moments, the visitor left. Claire remained near the entrance, looking down at a sheet of paper inside the folder. For a brief second, she closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just long enough to collect herself. Then she folded the document and returned to work. Ethan watched the entire exchange. Something shifted inside him. Over the years, he had met countless people who spoke about sacrifice. Few actually practiced it. Claire never spoke about hers. She simply lived it. Later that evening, as the cafe prepared to close, Ethan remained seated by the window. Claire was stacking chairs onto tables. The room felt peaceful, quiet, almost suspended in time. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Claire looked up. "You ask that a lot." "I know. Go ahead." Ethan hesitated. "What keeps you going?" Claire rested her hands lightly on the back of a chair. She thought about the question longer than usual. Some people wake up every day thinking about what they want from life. Her voice was calm. "I wake up thinking about who is counting on me." The answer landed harder than Ethan expected. Claire smiled gently. "It sounds less heroic than it is." "No," Ethan said quietly. "It does not." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rain traced silver paths across the dark window beside them. The city rushed beyond the glass. But inside the small cafe, everything felt still. And Ethan realized something that unsettled him in the best possible way. The more he learned about Claire Bennett, the less interested he became in impressing her. What he wanted instead was to become someone worthy of her respect. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Elegant, simple, printed on thick, cream-colored paper. Claire turned it over twice before reading it again. A charity gala hosted by the Carter Foundation. Formal attire requested. Guests from across the city expected to attend. At the bottom, a handwritten note appeared in familiar writing. "I would be honored if you came. Ethan." Claire stared at the card for several seconds. Then she laughed softly and placed it beside the register. Mrs. Harper noticed immediately. "That looks important." "I'm not sure it is. The paper alone probably costs more than my monthly coffee budget." Claire smiled. That is not exactly a high bar. By Friday evening, she still had not decided whether attending was a good idea. Yet somehow she found herself standing beneath the glowing entrance of the Grand Regent Hotel. The same building where Manhattan's elite gathered for events that usually existed far outside her world. The ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Conversations drifted through the air like carefully rehearsed performances. Claire suddenly felt very aware of her surroundings. Not because of her dress. It was elegant and simple. Not because she looked out of place. She did not. The discomfort came from something else. This was a room where status mattered. She had spent years avoiding rooms like that. Across the ballroom, Ethan noticed her arrival immediately. For a moment, the noise seemed to fade. Claire looked exactly like herself. Calm, composed, unimpressed by the luxury surrounding her. And somehow that made her stand out more than anyone else there. He crossed the room before he realized he was doing it. "You came." Claire glanced around. "You sound surprised. Maybe relieved." A faint smile appeared. "That is probably more honest." For the next hour, they spoke with donors, business leaders, and community organizers. Claire listened more than she talked. Asked thoughtful questions. Remembered names. Treated everyone with the same quiet respect she showed customers at the cafe. Ethan watched the reactions carefully. People liked her. Not because she was trying to impress them. Because she was not. Then came the moment neither of them expected. A woman standing near one of the auction displays glanced at Claire before turning toward a small group of guests. Her voice was not loud, but it was loud enough. "I heard she works at a cafe." An amused smile followed. Interesting choice of company for someone like Ethan. Several people exchanged awkward looks. The comment was subtle, polished, yet its meaning was unmistakable. Claire heard it. So did Ethan. For a second, nobody spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Claire's expression did not change. She had heard variations of that judgment before. People often assumed uniforms revealed a person's value. She was prepared to ignore it. Ethan was not. He stepped forward calmly. No anger. No confrontation. Just certainty. "You are right," he said. The group turned toward him. Ethan glanced at Claire before continuing. "She does work at a cafe." Silence settled over the conversation. "She is also the most genuine person in this room." Nobody interrupted. "She is the only person here who treated me exactly the same before and after knowing who I was." His voice remained steady. And if more people shared her character, events like this would not be necessary. The room grew quiet. Not from discomfort this time. From respect. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Something had changed. Months ago, Ethan would have measured success by applause, influence, or recognition. Tonight he had chosen something else. Principle. Across the ballroom, the music continued. Glasses clinked softly. Conversations slowly resumed. But for the first time, Claire saw not the billionaire everyone admired. She saw the man he was becoming. Winter arrived quietly in Manhattan. The rainstorms became colder. The mornings arrived later. Maple Street Cafe decorated its front window with simple white lights that reflected softly against the glass each evening. Months had passed since Ethan first walked through the cafe door looking for nothing more than a place to escape the weather. Now the window table felt less like a destination and more like part of his life. Some things had changed. Some things had not. Claire still worked long hours. She still greeted every customer with the same calm kindness. She still refused to treat wealth as something magical. Ethan still visited several times each week. Still ordered coffee more often than he probably should have. Still found himself listening more carefully whenever Claire spoke. Yet the biggest change was not in Claire. It was in him. One afternoon Marcus joined him at the cafe. The two men sat near the window while snow drifted gently outside. Marcus looked around the room and smiled knowingly. "You realize this is the happiest I have seen you in years." Ethan stirred his coffee. "That seems dramatic." "No," Marcus leaned back. "You used to treat every conversation like a negotiation." Ethan glanced toward the counter where Claire was helping a customer. "And now? Now you actually listen." Ethan looked down at his cup. For once, he had no argument. Later that evening, after the cafe closed, Claire stepped outside carrying her familiar canvas bag. Snowflakes floated through the glow of the streetlights. Ethan was waiting near the entrance. "You know," Claire said, "most customers eventually leave." "That sounds suspiciously directed at me." "Maybe a little." They began walking slowly down the sidewalk. The city felt quieter beneath the fresh snow. Cars moved carefully through the streets. Storefront lights reflected across the sidewalks. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Ethan had spent years avoiding silence. With Claire, he had learned to appreciate it. "Can I tell you something?" he finally asked. "You usually do." He smiled. "Fair point." Claire looked at him expectantly. Ethan took a breath. "When I first came to the cafe, I thought I was curious about you. And now," he watched a snowflake disappear against the sleeve of his coat. "Now I think you reminded me of someone I forgot how to be." Claire remained quiet. So he continued. "Somewhere along the way, I started measuring everything. Success, time, people, outcomes." He shook his head gently. "You never did." Claire looked ahead toward the softly lit street. "Maybe because I never had enough certainty to believe I could measure life correctly." Ethan laughed softly. "That sounds like something you would say." "Probably." They reached a small park overlooking the city. Snow rested across empty benches. The skyline shimmered in the distance. Claire stopped beside the railing and looked out at the lights. Ethan stood beside her. No speeches. No grand declarations. No dramatic moment. Just two people sharing a quiet evening. After a while, Claire smiled. "Do you know what I think is funny?" "What?" "The entire city seems to think I changed your life." Ethan considered that. Then he smiled. "They are wrong." Claire raised an eyebrow. Ethan looked out across the skyline. "You did not change me." His voice was calm. "Certain. You simply reminded me who I wanted to become." The city lights sparkled beyond them. Snow continued falling. Somewhere in the distance, life rushed forward as it always had. But neither of them seemed in a hurry. And perhaps that was the lesson hidden inside the story all along. The people who leave the deepest mark on our lives are rarely the ones trying to impress us. They are usually the ones quietly living with dignity, kindness, and enough courage to remain themselves in a world constantly asking them to be something else.